When Dead Space first released in 2008, it quickly became a soaring success and was hailed as a survival horror masterpiece. Everything from the gameplay to the graphics to the atmosphere added up to deliver a truly terrifying yet memorable experience. The level and sound design were perfectly in line with the core theme of being stuck on a giant ship in the void of space. The necromorphs were relentless and unpredictable, and the story moved along at just the right pace and had some interesting twists. All this and more made Dead Space a truly great experience that still holds up well today, 13 years after its original release. That isn't to say, of course, that the game was flawless. Some common complaints were about how the game felt repetitive at times and the enemy variety was not so great. And while Dead Space 2 expanded upon everything that made the first game so good, Dead Space 3's change of direction from pure survival horror to action with horror elements was definitely not something that the fans were happy about. And with Visceral Games being shut down by EA, all hope seemed lost for a new Dead Space game. However, now with an official Dead Space remake in the works, fans have a renewed sense of hope for the series' future. The developers say they'll stay true to the original game while introducing new elements and include content that was previously cut from the original game. But what about the things that do not need to be in the new release? While many people are talking about what the remake can do better, what about the mistakes that it needs to avoid? So in this video, I wanted to present some of the things that the Dead Space remake could do well without. So without further ado, here are some of the things that the Dead Space remake should not do. Number 1. The Autosave Icon. One of the things that set the original games apart from the other horror titles out there was its sharp focus on keeping the player immersed in the game world. And Dead Space achieved this by completely getting rid of a heads-up display. Instead, everything had a context within the game world. From your health to your ammo and even the way you saved your game. There were no menus, no icons, nothing. So every time the player stopped to check their inventory or to save their game, they had to be sure there were no enemies around and would have to find their way to a safe station. This simple yet highly effective concept worked extremely well for the first game, allowing players to be more engrossed within the story. Fast forward to Dead Space 3 and all of a sudden we get this. The autosave icon was easily one of the biggest immersion-breaking factors within the game. Not only did it make the game feel more generic, but the feature itself allowed players to farm resources by repeatedly restarting at key checkpoints throughout and effectively undermining the survival part of the survival horror. This is something that I would hate to see returning in the Dead Space remake. Number 2. Universal ammo and weapon customization. Most of the great survival horror games, and survival games in general, place great emphasis on resource management as one of the core gameplay mechanics, and Dead Space was no different in this regard. Considering the game's setting and backstory, and given the fact that Isaac is an engineer, it made perfect sense that his weapons were modified mining tools and the ammo for these were scarce, forcing the player to be conservative with their ammunition and to rely on unconventional means to fight the necromorphs. Needless to say, the introduction of the crafting mechanic in combination with the autosave exploit also allows players to craft ultra-deadly super weapons that could pretty easily break through anything the necros threw at them, effectively turning Isaac into a walking nightmare for the necromorphs and not the other way around. This in turn drastically reduced the scare factor of the game and is something that the remake should stay as far away from as possible. Number 3. Online-only gameplay modes. Now Dead Space was primarily a single-player experience. It was the personal story of one individual trapped in a life-or-death situation, and it worked flawlessly. Then Dead Space 2 brought multiplayer to the series, and Dead Space 3 brought online co-op. And while the multiplayer in Dead Space 2 was still somewhat well received, the big problem with the Dead Space 3's co-op was that it was online only and the co-op missions delved into Carvel's backstory. This means that if I choose to play single-player campaign, then I miss out on some parts of the story that are tied to one of the most prominent characters within the game. Now while we can be sure that such a scenario is highly unlikely in the Dead Space remake, if the developers decide to lock some parts of the game's lore or other elements behind an online-only component, that would be a huge letdown for fans who want to enjoy the single-player experience. And needless to say, the Dead Space remake should absolutely avoid doing this. Number 4. Dive rolls, cover, and combat skills. Part of the horror of Dead Space came from the fact that Isaac was thrown into a dangerous situation that he wasn't prepared to deal with. He is an engineer sent to repair a damaged ship and not a soldier sent there to kill the monsters. So it made perfect sense that Isaac's movements were limited to the clunky walk and run animations. By the third game, of course, Isaac has seen the death and destruction that the markers can cause, so it makes sense that having survived 2 outbreaks, he was a more grizzled fighter now, and he knew how to take cover or dive roll away from danger. But what if they add those moments to him in the Dead Space remake? It would feel out of place for his character, and should in my opinion be left well enough alone. Now, while there are plenty of other things that the remake should avoid, these are, in my opinion, the 4 most important things that it should stay away from. That's about it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments what you think about the video and if there is anything else the remake should not do.